What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about Toronto versus Montreal. This is a Canadian city comparison. I actually did a video somewhat recently about Toronto versus Vancouver, which was very interesting, and a lot of people commented that I should do a Toronto versus Montreal. So here we are. And I'm very interested to see two of Canada's most famous cities go head to head. So, with that being said, let's take a look.
The two largest cities in Canada, just about 547 kilometers or 340 miles apart from each other.
Really? You know what? I never realized how pretty close together Toronto and Montreal are. That's actually amazing. Believe me, most Americans, myself included, we, embarrassingly, we really don't even know where most Canadian cities are even located, on a map. Most Americans have heard of Toronto, but that's about it. And then when we hear the word like Vancouver or Montreal, we're like, oh yeah, right, those Canadian cities. But goodness knows, we can't really place them on a map. So I'm actually kind of genuinely fascinated with how close together. 340 miles between Toronto and Montreal. That's not too bad. You could easily drive that in a day. That's amazing for two of Canada's biggest cities, right?
While the two cities are dynamic, cosmopolitan, global cities with amazing attractions, both are quite different. Let's start with the language.
That's what I'm really interested here today, in learning about the differences between these two Canadian cities and maybe why someone would choose to live in one over the other. I don't want to get too controversial here, but this is a sort of a city battle after all. So let's get controversial. Let's see what the best of each city has to offer.
French is the primary language of Montreal,
right,
while English is the primary language of Toronto.
Right. That's right. That is also embarrassing that wasn't the first thing to come into my mind. Maybe that is the American in me showing today. Right, Montreal is in Quebec, so it's French. I've always wondered, do a lot of Canadians speak both English and French? Because I know in Montreal and Quebec, most people speak French. But do you also, are you largely bilingual? Do you speak English? And the other way around, do people in English-speaking parts of Canada, do you go out of your way to learn French? How bilingual is Canada? That's kind of my question.
Oh, but wait, Mr. Beat, aren't both English and French official languages in Canada?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but Montreal is in Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I know these
Hello.
things.
He's from Quebec.
I know. Also pronounced Quebec or Quebec, which is the only...
Oh, am I saying it wrong? I already forget what is the correct way. Quebec, Quebec, Quebec. I think I'm just going to go with Quebec because that's the best I can do.
Only province where the majority of residents speak French. But have no fear, English-speaking peoples. More than 59% of Montreal residents can speak both English and French.
I'm so glad. It's like this video read my mind. That is exactly what I was wondering. That's amazing. 59% of Montreal residents speak English and French. That's incredible. Being bilingual, speaking multiple languages, that's like a superpower, as far as I'm concerned. So that's really impressive. 59% of Montreal, wow.
Less than 1% of folks who live in Toronto mostly speak French.
And then, is that so there's French speakers in Canada, mostly in Quebec, that probably learn English because there's a lot of parts of Canada that speak English. So that makes sense to me. There'd be probably more bilingual people in French Canada, like Quebec. Probably not so many in the other parts of Canada where you can get by just speaking English. That kind of makes sense to me.
Although most Toronto residents know at least some French,
Oh.
or at least they were supposed to learn it in school.
Oh, oui, oui. S'il vous plaît. Je m'appelle Tyler. Bouquet. There we go. I remember some French.
Pay attention in school, kids. Why the language difference? Well, let's get into some history. Montreal is 151 years older than
Wow.
Toronto.
Really?
Whoa, dude. In 1901, Montreal had around 326,000 people, and
Okay.
Toronto just had around 238,000. However,
Really? This is like 100 years ago. So I'm pretty sure Toronto is the biggest city in Canada, right? It's got it's got like millions and millions of people. It's gigantic. I know that's what it's famous for as well. So 100 years ago, Montreal was actually a bit like kind of substantially bigger than Toronto, it turns out.
However, after World War II, Toronto caught up and surpassed Montreal in population, becoming the new economic capital of Canada. Since then,
Oh, that's interesting. So that implies that in the beginning of Canada's history, up until like the 1900s, Montreal was like the economic center of Canada. And then only after the World War did Toronto see like a boom in population and it became like the new economic bigger center of Canada. I did not know that. Never knew that. I didn't know I was going to get like sort of a Canadian history lesson today, but I'm not upset. Okay.
both cities have steadily grown, both competing to dominate the culture of Eastern Canada,
Right.
although the two coexist quite well with Toronto's Anglophone focus and Montreal's Francophone focus.
Anglophone? What is an Anglophone? Why does it have a little spaceship next to it? Is this like, does this have to do with aliens? Are people from Toronto aliens? What's a Francophone? That sounds like French. Are we just saying like English and French culture? That kind of thing? I don't know. I don't know what Anglophone or Francophone really means, but that's okay. I don't know what a lot of stuff means. And look look where I am now. I kind of understand things about stuff. So it'll be okay.
Don't get me wrong, many in both cities talk trash about the other. Today, the Toronto metropolitan area.
Really, talk trash about each other. Yeah, I'm not letting that just gloss on by. Is this like a friendly, like sibling sort of teasing relationship? You suck. Je te déteste. Je te déteste? This doesn't sound good. Some smack talk. Okay, hopefully in a friendly manner.
Many in both cities talk trash about the other. Today, the Toronto metropolitan area has around 5.9 million people.
Wow. Almost 6 million people. And Montreal has 4.1 million people. They're both gigantic. I actually didn't know that Montreal was that close in population size to Toronto. It's not that far behind. Like 4 million people, 6 million people. What's 2 million human beings between cities? You know, it's nothing, you know? Okay.
Montreal's metro area has around 4.1 million. Montreal has a lower population density than Toronto. Toronto has 3 international airports. Montreal has 2.
Okay, we're starting to get into some like real comparisons here and some reasons, finally, why you might actually choose one city over the other. I think the number one reason that's become very, very obvious by now is you probably would choose Montreal if you speak French, and you would probably pick Toronto if you speak English. But putting that aside, what are some of the other things that aren't so obvious? The population density and population size is smaller in Montreal, so maybe there's a little more breathing room, maybe more housing availability. There's not as many people, but gosh, 4 million people is still a lot. Like, they're both still huge cities. It's just like Toronto is probably feels mega packed. And maybe you're the type of person who really enjoys that. But that's a decision. Like, how busy and packed and populated do you want your city of choice to be? Toronto has one extra airport. I don't know if that matters too much. They both have multiple airports.
While both cities rank among the top for best big cities in the world to drive in, that doesn't mean they don't have traffic. Montreal's traffic is a little worse, though, mostly due to the fact that it's on an island and roads often get congested on bridges. So
Montreal is on an island? Since when? It has been a while. I'm sure in the past I've done at least one video, like, looking at Montreal. I remember how beautiful it was, but I didn't remember that it was on an island. Forgive me for that. That's actually surprising to me now, because I was thinking, why is the traffic worse in Montreal? Because that might actually be a consideration for where you want to work and live, how long it takes to do things. You don't want to spend the rest of your life in traffic unless you're into that. Maybe some people are. I would have thought Toronto traffic would have been the worst. That's surprising to me.
So how about transit? Both have pretty solid public transit, although Toronto has a better system according to at least one ranking. But
they actually tried to rank the public transportation systems. Montreal number 3, Toronto number 1, public transportation. Maybe because it's so big and kind of known as the economic hub of Canada, there's like been more investments into the public transportation. Both seem really good though.
But if you asked Torontonians about it, I'm sure they'd have lots to complain about. Montreal has several public transit providers. Two of the biggest are the Montreal Transit Corporation and Montreal Metro. Toronto has the Toronto Transit Commission, which has a huge network. But Montreal wins on public transit.
Really?
Why? Well, public transit is much cheaper there compared to Toronto.
Interesting. I like the deep dive that this guy is going into in this video. This is good. This is good stuff. These details. I was going to say, public transportation seems bigger and better in Toronto, but it's more expensive. They always get you with those extra fees. Those will get you.
So, actually, pretty much everything is cheaper in Montreal compared with Toronto.
Really?
The cost of living is about 27% higher in Toronto.
That's significant. That's significant. 27% more expensive. If it was like 5 or 10% more expensive, I'd be like, okay, not much difference. 27% more. Basically, the cost of everything on average in Toronto is 27% more expensive. That would really add up over time. Like, seriously.
Good thing the minimum wage is higher there compared to Montreal. Also, Montreal has higher taxes overall compared with Toronto.
Oh, wow. Okay. There's a lot of information here. This is good, though. So I guess depending on your province, there's different laws. Kind of like the states here in the States. Where they can set different tax levels, tax brackets. And what else? The minimum wage is different. Huh, I didn't know that. In different provinces, I guess? Okay.
Which makes sense, as Toronto has a lot more wealth. Its economy makes up 20% of Canada's GDP.
Wow.
It's the banking and stock exchange center of Canada.
Toronto is 20% of Canada's financial system. Basically, 20% of Canada's entire economy is in Toronto. That's insane. That says a lot. So maybe there's like more of that kind of financial economic opportunity, like some of those business goings-ons happening in Toronto. That would be a reason if you want to take advantage of that for like a job or something. Maybe that's a reason you would live in Toronto.
and produces over half of Canada's manufactured goods. Top industries in Toronto include finance, media, and technology.
Okay.
Montreal is also one of the most...
Oh my god, Montreal is beautiful. I'd forgotten. What's that weird little globe over there? There's a circle. Anyway. Oh, really on the water, and there's all these bridges? Oh, I'm remembering now. It was like this river, and it's on both sides of the river, and there's this bridge. Montreal is really quite beautiful.
Important economic hubs of the world. It remains the trade leader in the country. The Port of Montreal is the largest inland port in the world. Other top...
Oh, Montreal actually has an important position in Canadian trade. I don't know what river or body of water it's located by. I'm not very good at geography, especially Canadian geography, as you might have noticed. But it's really, Montreal's in a great spot for trade and accessing like water and boat routes and stuff. I did not know that. So Montreal is very important in its own right for that in Canada.
World. Other top industries in the city include media, artificial intelligence, and, believe it or not, video games. Notice how I said both.
Wait a minute, okay. I like media. Well, kinda. Artificial intelligence, that's very hip right now. And video games, okay. Starting to sound pretty good.
Believe it or not, video games. Notice how I said both were media hubs. Perhaps obviously, Toronto is Canada's English language media hub, and Montreal, Canada's French language media.
That makes sense. You know, I need to know like what percentage of the Canadian population is French speakers, and what percentage is English speakers, because that would be important for me understanding like the significance of Toronto being the English-speaking hub of Canada, Montreal being the French-speaking hub of Canada. Maybe I can look this up. Okay, here we go. French is the first official language of 22.8% of Canada's population. That's actually more than I would have thought. I didn't know. I thought French Canada was like maybe this minority, small part of Canada. It is the minority, obviously, but 1 out of 5 Canadians are French speaking. That's not bad. It's a lot of people, or about 7.2 million people. English is the first language of 56% of Canadians. 18% of Canadians speak both French and English. Interesting. Is most of that 18% within the 22.8% of French speakers? Are most French Canadians bilingual? I feel like that's probably true. But anyway, this puts all the language in Canada much better in perspective for me. So let's get back to the video.
Montreal currently has a lower unemployment rate. Both have similar poverty rates. Both cities have pretty low crime compared with other cities of comparable size.
Really?
But Montreal has a lower murder rate.
That seems like a very Canadian thing. The fact that both of these huge cities have low crime rates, that's a Canadian thing. I feel like they're talking about American cities when they're like, these have relatively low crime compared to other cities of the same or similar size. It's like, yeah, American cities, yeah.
While both cities have bike sharing programs, Montreal's is more than twice as big. Oh, now, how about the people? The people in both cities are great.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, you want more than that?
Yes.
Well, the average age is about the same in both cities. Montreal's huge student population surprisingly doesn't bring it down more. Both cities are multicultural hubs filled with immigrants from all over. However,
that's something I've heard quite a bit that I know Canada is proud of. It's very diverse population, so both of these cities are very, very diverse and multicultural, and looks like you get a lot of great food as a product of that, which is also very cool.
All over. However, Toronto has a lot more. 46.1% of Toronto residents were born in another country.
No kidding. Wow. That is new to me. That is shocking. Not a bad thing. just surprised that almost 50% of people living in Toronto were born in another country. Almost 50% of people in Toronto are immigrants. Like, that is an astounding statistic. That is millions and millions of people that have traveled to Toronto from other parts of the world. It must be a very, very desirable place to live for people in lots of other countries, I guess. I guess it has a very good reputation.
Compared with 23.4% of Montreal residents.
23% people immigrated to Montreal. That's still a lot more than I thought. I don't think in the United States we have nearly this amount of foreign-born people in our cities and stuff. 23%, 49%, really big numbers. Very, very cool, honestly. Very multicultural. A very unique thing about Canada, I think.
Roman Catholics make up the largest religious group in both cities.
Okay.
Toronto gets a little warmer in the summer, and Montreal gets a little colder in the winter.
Okay. We're going back to these fine little details, but if you're like me and you start shivering when the sun is still out, it might matter. Toronto has better summers. Montreal has colder winters? Oh boy. Okay, take that for what you will. This might matter to some people.
Don't get me wrong, both cities have long, brutal winters with lots of snow, but
Okay.
Montreal definitely gets a bit more of that.
Really?
Montreal gets quite...
Like, Americans wouldn't even know how to operate in this kind of condition. Like, honestly, it would be dangerous for Americans, a lot of Americans, to go to Montreal in the winter, but from what it looks like. Because, like, most of us, we don't know how to drive in, like, heavy snow. We don't have, like, the proper tires, even. We don't have snow tires or whatever you need to even drive safely. So that's actually a big deal for Americans, at least.
Montreal gets quite a bit more precipitation than Toronto.
Really?
And, yeah, less sunny days.
Really? Montreal just has worse weather. Like, there's no way around it. So that's one criticism. Most of this video has been very complimentary of both cities. They both have a lot of great things about them. Reasons why you would want to pick one. And then finally, we get to the crux of the matter. Montreal has bad weather. You can't have it all. You just can't.
Said earlier, Montreal is on a freaking island.
Yeah.
The island of Montreal, as a matter of
Okay.
fact. There are more people living on that island than any other island surrounded by fresh water in the world. The island is surrounded by the
Really?
majestic St. Lawrence River to the south and the
Okay.
Rivière des Prairies to the north.
Okay, this is good for me to know. I'm never going to remember this. St. Lawrence River, Rivière des Prairies?
A delta channel of the Ottawa River. Fun fact, Montreal used to have a river it dumped sewage in called the St. Paris River. It was so bad that for safety's sake, Montreal residents buried it. Toronto has the Humber and Don rivers.
Humber and Don River, okay.
But who cares about rivers when it has a giant lake, baby? That's right.
Right.
It sits right on Lake Ontario.
Right! Oh, that's very cool. Holy cow, this is a big lake. This makes it look like Toronto is almost on an island. Just from this photo, anyway. Maybe it's just the perspective here.
But while Toronto has one of the Great Lakes, it doesn't have mountains nearby to escape to like Montreal does.
Really?
But why escape? Both cities are fairly clean and have less pollution than most cities of their size.
Nice.
How about professional sports teams? Well, Montreal has the Canadiens for hockey, the Alouettes for Canadian football, and Impact for soccer.
There's Canadian football? There's like a whole Canadian football league. I've actually never heard of this team before. That's cool.
Toronto has you straight up beat for a number of professional sports teams, with the Maple Leafs for hockey, Argonauts for Canadian football.
The Argonauts. This Canadian football is really interesting to me because I only know about the NFL here in America.
And Toronto FC for soccer, plus the
Huh.
Raptors, who play in the NBA, and Blue Jays, who play in the MLB.
Right.
I know, Montreal used to have the Expos. The Leafs and Habs are pretty big rivals in the NHL, by the way.
Really?
Excuse me.
That kind of works out perfectly, right? If there's any kind of friendly competition between Montreal and Toronto, you can just duke it out like true Canadians on the hockey rink. A friendly rivalry, of course. Wow, that's great.
Excuse my pronunciations here, but major attractions in Montreal include Montreal, Parc Jean Drapeau.
There's the bubble. this bubble thing. I saw this earlier. What is this thing? It looks like aliens built it. Is that what the Francophone alien graphic was about? Who built this thing?
Notre Dame Basilica of Montreal and Old Montreal. Major attraction.
Right. Montreal definitely has like sort of this European-ish feel to it. Statues, cathedrals, big orbs.
In Toronto include the CN Tower, the Distillery District, the Royal Ontario Museum, and the Toronto Islands. Other random differences, while Montreal hosted the 1976 Summer Olympics, Toronto has surprisingly never hosted the Olympics. Montreal has hosted...
Toronto's never hosted Olympics. That's actually surprising to me.
A World's Fair, and Toronto hasn't. While the French food in Montreal is obviously unbeatable.
Oh, now we're talking. We're talking about food. This is what I came for. Forget all the other stuff. What's the food like? What's this, like Montreal bagels?
Toronto tends to have more food diversity overall. And sorry, Montreal. Toronto's roads tend to be in better shape. Toronto...
Wow, we are really going all over the place with the comparisons here. So Toronto has a more diverse selection of food, but I'm guessing Montreal has like traditional French-Canadian food, whatever that might encompass. So they're different for different reasons. And the roads are better in Toronto. The most random facts, but this stuff matters, though.
In better shape. Toronto has stricter laws on drinking alcohol. In fact, the drinking age is 19 in Toronto and just 18 in Montreal.
Yay.
And finally, the architecture in Montreal is far superior. I'm getting into my opinion.
Well, see, the architecture in Montreal is more famous. From what I remember, it was pretty stunning, like objectively.
Better stop while I'm ahead. The bottom line is, for Canadians looking to move to the big city, they have two fantastic choices.
Yeah.
Not only are Toronto and Montreal two of the most attractive cities in Canada, they are two of the most attractive cities in the world.
Yeah. Okay. And there we have it. That was fantastic. That was so interesting. And I tend to agree with the closing statement here that, man, it's very hard to choose between the two. They're both very, very cool for different reasons, totally different reasons. By the way, this video is by Mr. Beat, and I gotta give it a like. I gotta give credit to Mr. Beat, because this was a great video, very well done. I really enjoyed how he went into detail on some of the comparisons, like what roads are better, like the food is different, the buildings are different. Like, the unemployment is different. All sorts of stuff. And this is just really enjoyable. Again, as an English-speaking American, it's obvious to me that it would just be easier to exist in Toronto since I speak English and I don't speak French, and my little terrible attempts at speaking French words are horrible. But that being said, Montreal seems like a whole new experience in and of its own, something that like is just completely different and has this European architecture and is on this beautiful island, and I don't know, they're just for totally different reasons. There's such great stuff about both of these cities, but this comparison was very interesting because they are a really, really different, more different than it could have imagined, honestly. So this was quite enjoyable for me. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like Or, dare I say, leave a comment about your thoughts on Toronto versus Montreal, what you think of the two cities, if you have a preference, and why. That kind of thing. That'd be very interesting to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture and learning things about Canada, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.